We're continuing our study through the book of Habakkuk here at Disciple Dojo. This is a small group intended study, so if you're watching these by yourself, that's completely fine, but they are intended to be used within the context of a group setting, a Sunday school class, a campus ministry, something like that. So if you haven't seen any of the previous episodes, if YouTube is just showing you this for the first time on your algorithm, check the playlist here on the channel. All the videos can be found there, and be sure to watch them in order because we're going sequentially. And with that out of the way, let's get back into Habakkuk. We're in chapter 3. So in the last episode, we ended in chapter 2, verse 20, but Yahweh is in his holy temple, hush before him, all the earth. And this is actually a common theme in the prophets, this call to hush, to prepare for judgment. We read in Amos chapter 8, verse 3, the songs of the temple shall become wailings in that day, and that day is the day of the Lord, says the Lord God. The dead bodies shall be many, cast out in every place. Be silent. And it's that Hebrew word right there, hus, literally hush. You see it in Zephaniah 1:7. There it is, hus. Be silent before the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is at hand. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He had consecrated his guests. And Zechariah 2:13, hus, be silent, all people, before the Lord, for he has roused himself from his holy dwelling. And so we're conditioned to expect some type of judgment or some type of revelation, some type of vision. Something is about to be revealed that's going to be really important. And it's probably going to have echoes of the day of the Lord concept. And so Marduk, of course, picks up on this. She says, the accused wait in silence to hear God's sentence. In this context, and in absolute contrast to the mute idols, God will declare truth, and he will be the one to pass judgment on the earth, both Israel and the nations. Does this silence apply to Habakkuk's questioning as well? Has reflecting on the problem of evil reached its limits? Must it now give way to a different kind of reflection exclusively about who God is? The prophet invites us to listen to his prayer to the Creator God, the God of the Exodus, Sinai, and the whole world, who is above all. From this perspective, and to this God, he declares his loyalty in the midst of chaos, deriving his joy and strength from his trusted Savior. And so what we're about to see in Habakkuk chapter 3 is in the midst of calamity, chaos, confusion, all the stuff Habakkuk has been bringing before God in prayer. Sometimes the only response is, as Habakkuk was told to do at the beginning of chapter 2, though it seems to tarry, wait for it, it will not stay back, and we worship. And that's all of what chapter 3 is going to be. After the call to hush before him all the earth, Habakkuk sings. And there's a lot of parallels between chapter 1 and chapter 3 of Habakkuk. Chapter 1 is the prophet in prayer. Well, chapter 3 is going to be the prophet in prayer. But chapter 1 was a lament. Chapter 3 is going to be a celebration in the midst of fear and uncertainty. That didn't go away, but something changes in Habakkuk between chapter 1 and chapter 3. In chapter 1, he accuses Yahweh of not listening. Remember how the book started? Ad ana Adonai, how long, O Lord? And now in chapter 3, he's heard back from Yahweh. Yahweh has responded to him. In chapter 1, he's going to cry out, why won't you act? Why do you just look upon evil? And now in chapter 3, in this song, he's going to stand in awe of Yahweh's acts. In chapter 1, we saw this vision. God revealed this terrifying vision of a Babylonian army. And now in chapter 3, we're going to get a vision of the true divine warrior. And then lastly, in chapter 1, Habakkuk asked 3 questions. How long must I scream for help? Why do you show me iniquity? And why do you look upon the evil ones? In chapter 3, there's going to be 3 petitions. So he's not going to be asking questions of God anymore. He's going to be asking specific things for God to do now in response. And we see these right at the beginning of chapter 3. It says, a praise of Habakkuk the prophet upon Shigionoth. Some people think Shigionoth is like a stringed instrument of some types. Others say, no, it's a specific melody or something like that. Honestly, interpreters don't know. And so I've just left it transliterated. And so Habakkuk's song begins, Yahweh, or Adonai, Lord, I hear your news. I fear, Yahweh, your work, Pa'alka. Your Pa'al. Pa'al is like a deed or something that's done. In the midst of years, bring it to life. In the midst of years, make it known. In the midst of years means like don't wait until the end of the years, like until the end of whatever time period we're waiting in. Bring it forward. Bring it in the midst of the years. Like, let it happen soon. The Septuagint, though, slightly differently says, in the midst of two living creatures, let it be known. So possibly the idea is, God is the one who dwells above the two living creatures. And so make it known to them, like maybe starting in the temple and going out to the world, let it be proclaimed. That might be how the Septuagint is reading this. It's a little obscure. And then this next line, in the approaching year, in the coming year, let it be known. So a slight variation if you're reading the Greek text, but the idea is essentially the same. What you've told me and your deeds and your work and what you're doing in response, bring it now, Lord. Like, let it happen. And then his final petition, Barogates tizkor. In rogates, wrath or trembling, the idea is either like trembling, not like fear, but trembling with anger. He's saying, in that, Lord, rechem. And this is related to the root word that means literally womb. So that's sort of the semantic domain that's talking about pity, like be compassionate, to have pity, to have compassion, to be moved by. This is sort of what this word entails. So now Habakkuk has heard, and that hearing doesn't mean he's all of a sudden happy. He hears and it's terrifying. The fear is still there. There's still fear, but it's not dread. It's a different type of fear. It's a fear that then has confidence to make petitions. Bring it to life. Make it known, but remember to take pity. And just remember this, rogates, trembling. In this section, it's probably has the connotation of wrath, but this verb, tremble, is going to be found elsewhere in this song as we go through it. And so now verse 3 is where, the whole chapter is the song. Like verse 1 was sort of the title. Verse 2 was maybe the introduction. Now we're in the body of the song itself. And so we read, God from Teman came, and holiness from the mountains of Paran, Selah. Now, Teman is south. This is down in Edom. Why is it important that God is coming from the south? Well, because where did the army that was coming in chapter 1, the fearsome Babylonian army, where did they come from? From the north. So the armies, the enemies of God, and that's what the Babylonian army represented, the ultimate enemies of God par excellence, they're coming from the north. So God going out to meet his enemies in this poetic image is coming from the south. His majesty covered the sky, and his praise song filled the land. So Tehillah is the word for psalm. It's a song of praise. That's what the book of Psalms is called in the Hebrew Bible. And that's what now fills the land. Allah ha'aretz. In the last chapter, you saw at the center of the book, the knowledge of the glory of the Lord will fill the earth. And we see that now happening in the form of song, praise song, in the middle of an actual praise song that Habakkuk composed. And now look at this image. And radiance, light it will be. Horns from his hand he has. Karnaim is this word for horns, and it's the way you talk about light rays. This is why we've done a video on this, I think, before, why that certain depictions of Moses have him with two literal horns coming out of his head. And it's because this word was misread as referring to horns, like horns on a goat, rather than rays of light, which is what was coming out of Moses's face. And so this tradition arose that Moses had horns, but the text was actually saying no, rays of light were coming from his face. His face was shining. So in this image, if you want to keep the idiom, you can say horns of light, but rays of light from his hand. And this is interesting imagery because ancient Near Eastern gods like Baal, you may know him as Baal, also was said to have lightning in his hand. But in this case, in Habakkuk, it's Yahweh. He's the one who controls light itself. And there, a concealment of his might. This is storm imagery. That's what this is. And even then, though, there's a concealment of his might. Like it's visible, but it's also not fully exposed. It's concealed behind the thick clouds, the thunder, the storm, the wind, all of this. So it's not unmediated vision of God's splendor, but it is a partial vision of God's splendor. And even a partial vision of God's splendor is terrifying. The Septuagint has it a little bit differently. It's instead of saying there is a concealment of his might, it says he placed mighty love of his strength. So the Septuagint sort of combines the might and the strength, but with this idea of love. You can see it right there, agapesen. He's a terrifying God. He's a strong God. He's a storm God, the storm God of all storm gods, but he's also a God of love, if the Septuagint reading is original. And then verse 5, before him will go daber. And daber is the word for pestilence. And reshef, which is the word for plague or lightning, we would say in English, will follow in his footsteps. Go out to his feet means will go out in the same path that he's going. So Yahweh is depicted, this mighty God, and accompanying him is daber, pestilence, and reshef, plague, possibly lightning. Verse 6, he stood and he measured the land. He looked, he made the nations jump, or the peoples, goyim, there's the word there. They shattered the everlasting mountains. This is kind of Yoda speak, so just Hebrew word order, flip it. The everlasting mountains shattered. Not they shattered the mountains, but the mountains, they were shattered. They cowered, hills ancient. So even the mountains and the hills, which are the ultimate symbol of the strength of this earth, of stability, of eternal, like something that doesn't change, the hills, the mountains, they cower, they're shattered. Ancient pathways are his. And this is an image of a terrifying storm in the wilderness. If you've ever been out in the woods camping and a thunder, not just like a little bit of rain, maybe some distant thunder, but a full-on thunderstorm breaks out, it's terrifying. And that's the image in the next line, verse 7. Under disaster, tachat avein, I looked, the tents of Cushan tremble, the tent curtains of the land of Midian. You know, this mighty storm god on the march, moving from south to north, starting down in Midian. Midian was south on the eastern side of the Jordan, down below the Red Sea. Midian is down in what is today modern Saudi Arabia, in that direction, along the Gulf of Aqaba. And so that's where this storm image that God is being depicted as originates from. And so the tents there and the tent curtains trembling. There's that word again, ragats, to tremble. Now it doesn't mean wrath, it means tremble, as in literally the storm is making it shake, but also tremble as in fear. So clean it up a little bit, read it all the way through at once. God from Teman came, and holiness from the mountains of Paran, Selah. It covers the sky, his majesty, and his praise song fills the land. And radiance, like light it is, horns from his hand he has, and there a concealment of his might. Or Septuagint, he put a mighty love of his strength. Before him will go daber, and reshef will go out at his feet. He stands and he measures the land. He looks and makes the nations jump. They shatter the everlasting mountains. They cower the hills of old. Ancient pathways are his. Under disaster I see the tents of Cushan tremble, the tent curtains of the land of Midian. So Turner sums this up pretty well. He says, approaching the unapproachable and seeing the inconceivable produces appropriate fear and trembling. Yahweh's trembling, which we saw at the opening of the psalm when Habakkuk said, in your trembling, wrath, remember mercy. Yahweh's trembling causes a trembling in creation. Verse 7, causing onlookers themselves to tremble at the sight. We'll see that down in verse 16. So fear is not an inappropriate response to the God of all creation, even the loving God of all creation. There's a place for fear. It's the beginning of wisdom. It's not the end. The end, the goal is love. Perfect love casts out fear. But sometimes you don't have perfect love, and fear is pushing you in the right direction. And Turner notes in the beginning of this psalm especially, verses 3 through 5, they orient the reader toward the heavens, the light and the splendor and all of this. And then verses 6 and 7 orient the reader to the earth, the effect of this. The first half focuses on his glorious and fear-inducing presence. The second half focuses on creation's convulsive reaction to his presence. The main point is that when Yahweh appears on the scene, all creation convulses, inciting responses of fear and wonder and sometimes praise. These theophanies include the great moments of Yahweh's mighty acts. We see this over and over in Scripture, he's saying. Creation, flood, Exodus, Sinai, wilderness wanderings, conquest of Canaan, the whole Joshua account where, sun stands still, like that is the heavens were convulsing. There's a whole lot. Check our Joshua series where we teach through that book chapter by chapter for what's actually going on there and why it's not just about God making the sun stop literally in the sky, but there's something else happening using this similar language. Also, we see it in exile and return from exile. This holy God, whose presence in his holy temple calls for silence, the end of the last chapter, makes his appearance not to debate his actions, but to display his splendor. And it's kind of like at the end of the book of Job, where God shows up in the whirlwind. At the end of Habakkuk, God shows up in the storm. And for both Habakkuk and Job, that was enough. That's all they wanted. Yes, they wanted answers. Of course, they wanted to know why. We all want that. But in the end, they never are told why. They are just given a glimpse of God's splendor and glory, and that reorients them. And now the song gets into a very, very interesting part. We've already seen a hint of it with the verse 5 with Deber and Resheph, pestilence and plague, but they're actually names, which is why I've left them transliterated. In the ancient Near East world, these were deity type figures. Now we're going to get full on ancient Near East. Verse 8, is it against Naharim Yahweh burns, or against Naharim is your anger, or against Yam your wrath? Now, why have I left these transliterated and just told you what they mean? Well, Nahar means river, but the plural for rivers is not Naharim. Nahar is a feminine word in Hebrew. The plural of rivers is Naharoth. So this is Naharim. It's a masculine ending, masculine plural. And just like Deber and Resheph, this is also a name, not just the generic word for rivers. And then this word here, Yam, this is just the normal word for sea, but Yam is also the name of the Canaanite god of the sea. And one of his other names was Naharim. Why is Habakkuk singing about, like rhetorically, is God angry at rivers? Why would he even have to say that? Well, because in Canaanite mythology, the storm god battled the god of the sea. You can see Professor Aquaman behind me on the shelf has a whole video here on the channel about the sea in biblical imagery. And the most viewed video here on this channel is my 5-part series on the Baal myth, the actual story that this passage of Habakkuk is drawing upon, at least polemically. So you can check out this series. I'll link it in the video description below. We go into much more detail, but let me just read you a clip from the actual Baal myth to give you an idea of who Israel's neighbors thought the storm god should be and what the proper god should do. That's what the Canaanites worshipped Baal for. In the Baal myth, listen to what Baal does. And I'm just saying Baal because some people pronounce it Baal. It's actually Baal. It's actually not Baal, it's Balu. In Hebrew, it's Baal. In Canaanite, Ugaritic, it would be Balu. We just say Baal for the same reason that we say Jacob, even though in Hebrew it's Yaakov. In English, it becomes Jacob. So people comment all the time on that Baal series and correct me because they watched an episode of Stargate or something where they kept saying Baal. You can say Baal, you can say Baal. I say Baal. I'm Southern. I speak American English. It's talking about the Canaanite god, Baal in Hebrew, or Balu in Ugaritic. But it says, Baal opens up the rift in the clouds. Baal emits his holy voice, and this is what they believe thunder was. Baal makes the thunder roll over and over again. And in Ugaritic, that's literally Baal repeats the utterances of his lips. The utterance of his lips was what thunder was, according to the Canaanites. His holy voice causes the earth to tremble. At his thunder, the mountains shake with fear. The high places of the earth totter. That sound familiar? Baal's enemies grasp hold of the trees of the forest. Hadu's adversaries, and Hadu or Hadad was his proper name. So Baal was just a title that means Lord, and his actual name was probably Hadad or Hadu. Hadad's adversaries grasp hold of the flanks of the mountains. So now back to Habakkuk. Why is he asking if Yahweh's anger is burning against Naharim, rivers, or Yam, the sea? For you mount up on your horses, your chariots of salvation. Just like the Babylonian army, the Babylonian king in chapter 1, it talked about his horses being swift and leaping and how terrifying they were. Now, of course, Yahweh being personified as the head of the divine army, his horses, his chariots, but they're not chariots for war, they're chariots of salvation. And then this line, verse 9, very hard, obscure line. It says literally, and let me switch to the paralinear view. It says literally, nakedness uncovered will be your bow, like bow and arrow. Shavuoth, as this is pointed as vowels, this is being sworn in or having been sworn in. Now, if you repoint these vowels a little differently, you make some slight changes, this could also be very similar to the word seven. And so some translators, we'll see in a minute, have translated this as seven. But as it's pointed in the Masoretic text, it's sworn in matoth. Matoth is rod or staff or shaft in the plural. So sworn in shafts, rods, omer, of speech, selah. So sworn in shafts of speech or sworn in rods of speech. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, Kusudo, a Jewish scholar, has made the argument that this, if you change the vowels, not the consonants, but the vowels, it reads Amar. And we'll see why that's important in just a minute. And the Ugaritic of that would be Aimaru, Amar, Aimaru. And then the next part of the line says, Naharoth, there's the plural, not Naharim, but there's the actual plural of rivers. Naharoth, rivers, Tabaka, Aretz. You split or you will split the land. And so translations differ widely on how they translate it. I'll just read some different ones. Lexham English Bible. You laid bare the nakedness of your bow, swearing oaths with the arrows of your word. You split the earth with rivers. NIV, you uncovered your bow. You called for many arrows. You split the earth with rivers. King James, thy bow was made quite naked. According to the oaths of the tribes, even thy word, Selah, thou didst cleave the earth with rivers. So King James translates mate, staff, or rod as tribes. And it does have that meaning, rod, staff, tribe. Those are all meanings that mate can have. The NJPS, all bared and ready is your bow. Sworn are the rods of the word, Selah. You make the earth burst into streams. Revised Catholic, thou didst strip the sheath from thy bow and put the arrows to the string, Selah. Thou didst cleave the earth with rivers. New Revised, you brandished your naked bow. Sated were the arrows at your command, Selah. You split the earth with rivers. So they're taking not sworn in, but they're reading it as like shavat, to be satiated, to be filled. ESV, you strip the sheath from your bow, calling for many arrows. Selah, you split the earth with rivers. New American Standard, you removed your bow from its holder. The arrows of your word were sworn. Selah, you divided the earth with rivers. And then the CSB, you took the sheath from your bow. The arrows are ready to be used with an oath. Selah, you split the earth with rivers. But if you read, say, Robert Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible, Alter translates it this way. With Neharim is the Lord incensed. Against Neharim your wrath. Against Yam your fury. When you ride your horses, your chariots of victory. Laid bare is your bow, and the 7 rods of Amar, Selah. You split the earth with rivers. So he makes 2 interpretive choices that could be jarring if you've only read like 1 or 2 English translations. So in the notes, because Alter's translation has tons of excellent notes, even when I disagree with how he translates, his notes are good at explaining why. Why did he translate Neharim and Yam with 2 M's rather than rivers and sea? He says, although in other contexts these 2 words can mean respectively rivers and sea, parentheses, the usual plural of the former is Neharoth, here they hark back to Canaanite mythology where they figure as different names for the primordial sea monster that must be subdued by Baal, or in Israelite literature, like in the Psalms, by Yahweh. So in Canaanite literature, Baal is the one who subdues Neharim, which is another name for Yam, rivers, sea, the chaos serpent. See our video here on the channel, Dragons in the Bible, as well as the Aquaman episode of Superhero Seminary for more background on this. But that concept, Israelite biblical literature uses as polemical theology. And it says, no, it's not Baal that destroys Yam, that splits the head of the sea serpent. It's Yahweh. Yahweh's the one that does it, primarily in the Exodus, where he literally split the sea. And then the note on the 7 rods of Amar instead of sworn in shafts of speech. How did he get there? He says the Hebrew has omer, which means saying, but the scribe has either erased or was ignorant of the mythological reference that has been identified by Umberto Cassuto. In Ugaritic literature, Baal wields 2 rods called Amar, with which he strikes Nahar or Yam. When Baal goes out to fight Yam in the one of the opening battles of the Baal epic, we read, so the mace, Amar or Amaru, that's the name of Baal's mace, Amar, whirls in Baal's hand, like a hawk in his fingers, strikes Prince Yam on the head, ruler Naharu on the forehead. So you see the two names for the sea serpent, the chaos god, the force of evil. Yam goes groggy, falls to the ground, his joints go slack, his body slumps. Baal grabs Yam and sets about dismembering him, sets about finishing ruler Naharu off. So this now makes a lot more sense of what's going on in verse 9, I think. And I think altar is on the right track. I'm not sure that this should be translated as 7 instead of sworn in. I think it's kind of a nod to, Baal's weapon, his mace, was called Amar, and that's what he cracked the head of the sea serpent with. I think that Habakkuk in the Hebrew text is making a very unsubtle reference to that whole concept by saying God's bow is uncovered, nakedness uncovered is your bow, meaning he has taken out his bow. It's not on his back in his pouch anymore. His bow is out and ready. His rod is not a mace named Amar, but it's actually Omer. It's his word. It's a rod of speech, so to speak. And you could possibly take rods as shaft. And so this would be talking about the arrow that he would shoot from that uncovered bow, meaning the word that gets shot. So there's ambiguity. I don't want to make it too definite because, again, this is poetry. It's very hard poetry, and it also is filled with ancient Near East background. So I just want you to see the options on the table to be able to translate and understand what's going on in this very obscure part of Habakkuk in the middle of this song. And then the line, rivers, you split the land, I think that's probably best read as with rivers, like God splits the land, divides the land by commanding the waters, so to speak. And ironically, usually the sea serpent, the sea god, the chaos dragon is what uses its power over the waters to attack the land or to split the land or to assault the land in the ancient pagan mind. But now it's Yahweh is using rivers to split the land. I think this is, however you take this, I think it's displaying his sovereignty over the waters, over the forces of what should belong to the chaos monster. No, the God of Israel controls even those. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? Jesus' disciples asked when he what? Spoke to the storm and the waves were calmed. So I think all of that swirling in the background. And that's why verse 10 says, they see you, they writhe the mountains. He has command even over the mountains. Clouds of water pass over. The abyss to home, the deep, the primordial source of chaos. The abyss gives its voice. High, its hands it lifts. And the Septuagint has the heights of her pomp, but it uses this word, phantasias. So again, there's question of, do you take the Hebrew reading or the Greek reading here? But the image is the same. The abyss giving its voice, lifting high its hands. This is the image of the waves of the sea, roaring, crashing, breaking. And then look at verse 11. We mentioned Joshua before, right? That passage in Joshua where it said, sun, stand still. Look at verse 11. Sun and moon stand in her lofty domain. And for light, your arrows go. For flash of lightning, your spears. So lightning bolts are described as the arrows or the spears of Yahweh, not Baal, not Marduk, the Babylonian god. Marduk was very similar to Baal. Baal split Yam in half. Marduk split Tiamat in half. Tiamat is the sea serpent, and a related word to Tiamat, many have argued, is Tehom, the deep. So there's so many resonances of the ancient combat myth in this section of Habakkuk that it's layers and layers of meaning and image. Think about Billy Joel's song, We Didn't Start the Fire. Go through every line of that song. This is back when I was a kid, so kids, look it up. It's here on YouTube. Every line of that song is a reference to an event that everyone who lived through those events knows what he's talking about. But those of younger audiences who don't know those events, they would need to go learn the context of those events, then listen to the song, then it takes on completely different meaning. Well, that's how this is. This is a song at the end of Habakkuk, and if we don't know the culture, if we don't know the background, if we don't know the resonances, we can get the gist of the song, but we are going to miss the layers and layers and layers of meaning that really make it impactful in our life. So let's finish out this part of the song and then wrap it up for now. Verse 12, in curse you stride over the land. In anger you tread the nations. The Babylonian army at the beginning in chapter 1 was seeking to gather the nations like sand or like dust. Not this God. Now God is coming out to tread the nations. And this is image of treading, like treading grain or treading wine. What do? You put all the grapes in the vat and then you just stomp and you crush. But it's not for destruction. Look at verse 13. You go forth to save your people, to save your anointed. And there's the word Mashiach, your anointed. That is the king of Israel, the anointed one of Israel, the Messiah. Ultimately, this points forward to the capital M Messiah, but at this time, there is still a Davidic kingdom. Habakkuk's part of it. And yet we know that God is not going to save that Davidic kingdom. God's actually going to judge that Davidic kingdom. Habakkuk's contemporary, Jeremiah, is going to make that really clear. So this Mashiach that Yahweh is going to go out to save, his people must be talking about something further down the line, not Habakkuk's own generation, because they didn't get saved. They weren't saved. They were treaded by Babylon. This is pushing us forward. This is looking into the distant future, into the day of the Lord, the eschaton. And so how is God going to save the anointed? Well, the next part of the verse, you smash the head of a household of a wicked one, is most literally how you'd say this. To lay open from foundation up to neck, Selah. This is a reference to Marduk. When Marduk slayed Tiamat, the chaos dragon, Marduk, it says, I split her in half like a shellfish, from mouth down to foot, split the chaos serpent in half. Same thing with Baal and Yam. When Baal killed Yam, he cracked him his head open, split it open, and then he went about and he dismembered Yam. He divided Yam's body. This is a religious motif that's being used, but now it's not being used to describe some actual deity. Rather, it's painting a picture of the judgment that's going to happen on the household of the wicked, whether at a national level or down to individuals. This is the image of God's judgment. You pierce with his own staff the head of his leaders. So the household, the head of the household of the wicked, the puffed up, the arrogant, the one who just can consume and devour, whether it's Babylon or whether it's the wicked in Israel who do that to their neighbors in order to build themselves up. As we saw in the 5 woes, God's going to judge, and they're going to be pierced with his own staff. By your own weapon, you'll die. Ultimately, we see this happening on the cross. Jesus uses Satan's own weapon, false accusation, betrayal, crucifixion, which was seen as a cursed way to die. All of that is the very means by which Jesus brought about salvation. He used the enemy's own weapon against him. So while they storm to scatter me, they're rejoicing at devouring the afflicted and hiding. This is what the evildoers do. They need to know that, verse 15, you trample upon the sea with your horses, foaming great waters. Just as Baal killed Yam, just as Marduk killed Tiamat, Yahweh is going to do that to evil itself. The chaos serpent motif is a stand-in in the Bible. The Bible actually takes that motif polemically, and it says, no, it's not specific deities that we need God to defeat, because he has no rivals. He has no enemies. He speaks and creation itself obeys. He doesn't have to beat a chaos monster. What he's going to overcome is evil and wickedness itself. It's not a chaos serpent that God has to defeat. It is indwelling sin and Satan himself. That's who's going to be defeated. Satan and all who are allied with him are going to experience what symbolically is depicted as the trampling of the waters by the true storm god. And so Habakkuk now sings this line in response. I hear and my belly trembles. There's that word again, ragats, to tremble. At the sound, my lips quiver. Decay comes upon my bones, and underneath me I tremble in step. Or you could say my knees knock, like I'm trembling, his legs are shaking. He's just seen a terrifying image. And he has seen, yes, it's a message of hope. God is going to go forth to save his people, but it's going to involve judgment on the wicked. And on the ground, that's terrifying. So what does he choose to do? I wait for a day of distress to come upon a people assaulting us. Now, there's a variant reading that has this as a question. It says, will you rest? And so if that's the original reading, if it is, will you rest, then it could be him being scared and questioning God, saying, God, are you just going to rest while all this happens? Or he could be Habakkuk could be singing this song to his fellow Israelites. And if that's the case, I think the meaning might be something like a challenge to them. Like, can you rest or will you rest? Are you able to rest and wait for a day of distress to come upon a people assaulting us? I think that might be, if the Tikkun Soferim, if that's the right reading, that's the sense I think it has. Or if you take the Masoretic text, Habakkuk is declaring that. He's saying, I rest. In other words, I will wait. I will rest. I will wait for God, for the judge of all the earth, to do what is right. So summarizing all of this Baal background, ancient Near East background, Turner says, therefore, the theological picture in Habakkuk 3 and elsewhere is one of cosmic and chaotic forces, real or imagined, that stand behind the human drama. Just as during the Exodus, when Yahweh was ultimately showing his superiority over the Egyptian gods by defeating their human devotees in rescue mission of his own people, all of the attacks against Egypt, as my friend Charlie Trim puts it, what we sometimes call the plagues, those were targeting the domains and the priests of the gods of those domains of Egypt. Habakkuk's vision imagines a similar divine activity in the future. There's a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Thus, the need to envision a big God who can and will come to the rescue of his people by conquering what seems to be the unconquerable, which in the ancient Near Eastern mind was things like the abyss, the deep, the sea, death. Those are the gods, those are the things, those were the unconquerable things in the minds of Israel's neighbors. And Habakkuk is painting with that color scheme, but showing the reality that it all is only a vague, distorted hint or shadow of. And so Turner says, only the eyes of faith can grasp it. There comes a point where you have to choose to believe because there is no other option. Where else can we go, Lord? You're the one with the words of life. So the figure Babylon represents is more than the historical nation of the 7th and 6th centuries BC. Babylon represents all forces of evil arrayed against Yahweh and his kingdom. This is why the mythopoetic imagery of Habakkuk 3 blends in so nicely with the more historical focus of the earlier part of the book. Panel 1 is literally the armies of Babylon and the king of Babylon. So the answer to that in panel 3 is an image of the true God, everything to which Babylon aspires, defeating the true forces of chaos, and that is everything that Babylon and all the others like Babylon throughout history bring about on the earth. Evil, injustice, wickedness. So that's why that's why Babylon becomes a cipher in the Bible. Babylon is not just literally some country over in the Middle East, which is why all the end times experts out there are selling nonsense when they're telling you to watch for Babylon. I mean, I remember just a few years ago when Saddam Hussein was still alive and they were like, he's going to rebuild Babylon. It's like people are so focused on Iraq that they don't see the Babylon that they are living in right now. And I like how Thomas puts it. It is as if the prophet is looking at a vast painting of the Exodus experience that hangs in the gallery of Israel's faith. Surveying the various details of the masterpiece, the prophet surprisingly steps into the painting and walks alongside Yahweh as he marches through the desert to deliver. This whole song is reenacting or recapitulating on a cosmic scale the Exodus, where God, with his people, very literally in the tabernacle, traveled with them up from Paran, up from Midian, up into Moab, and then across, splitting the Jordan River, entering into the land of Canaan. And then under Joshua, driving out the wicked, the Canaanites. All of this is being recapitulated in the imagery of Habakkuk chapter 3. From his new perspective, Habakkuk can see his place in a whole new way, encouraged by the power and compassion of Yahweh at his side. And so that's where we're going to end it in this episode. Here are your discussion questions. If you're doing this as an individual, get out your journal and write down how you would answer these questions. Think about this and spend some time. Question 1, what do you think it means to be silent before God? And is this a struggle for you? Question 2, how in the world could the concept of God as a cosmic ancient Near East warrior, which is how he's depicted in line with other ancient Near East warrior gods like Baal or Marduk, how is that in any way a source of comfort in the midst of Habakkuk's suffering? Why is Habakkuk, as we're going to see in our final episode, Habakkuk's going to be comforted by it. How did it get there, though? And what does it say to us today? Are people suffering today reading Habakkuk's song because it was a song intended to be sung? How does that image provide any comfort for us today? Like bridge that gap in your discussion group. But that's all for now. We have one more episode to go in this Habakkuk study, so stay tuned. We're going to wrap it up in our next episode. Thanks for watching. Again, if you want to support this teaching ministry, we do very literally rely on monthly donors to keep all of this going. So if you would like to become one, check out the link. I'll put it right here on the screen below where you can become a Dojo donor. If you haven't already, subscribe, hit the notifications button, share this video with any pastors, ministry leaders, campus ministry pastors, Sunday school group teacher, anybody that you know that would be interested in a study like this of this very obscure, very challenging, but incredibly profound book. Share this series with them. Share the playlist with all of the videos that we have archived here on the channel. But that'll do for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here at Disciple Dojo next time. And in the meantime, as always, keep training.